Good afternoon, world. Good afternoon, our listeners in the state of Georgia in particular. You are listening to the WCEG Network on WCEGTalkRadio.com. You can click at the tab at that website, the live stream tab, or you can watch us live on your smart TV via YouTube. Just type in WCEG Network. I am Norman A. Carter Jr., your host on this special edition of Issues and Answers, and I'll be with you for the next hour or two. We are the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. You may like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. You can even follow us on Instagram at WCEG underscore talk underscore radio or at WCEG Network. Last but not least, the topics and opinions that you hear today are those of the show host and our very, very special guest, and not the WCEG Network. So leave my boss alone. Thank you for your continued support. We have a great program today with some special, very, very special guests. But first, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Miss Damita Chatman, who is from the Citizens for Excellence in Elected Leaders, particularly here in the state of Georgia. She is a mover and shaker. Welcome, Miss Chatman. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carter. Thank you so much.
And we have two special guests, only one of whom is with us now, but we expect the other to arrive shortly. Currently, we have Mr. Daniel Blackman, and we are expecting Dr. Robert Bryant. I'll give you a little background on Mr. Blackman. Mr. Blackman, welcome. Mr. Blackman is a candidate for Public Service Commissioner for Georgia District 4. Extensive background. I'll just give you a little thumbnail on Mr. Blackman. He is his past experience is Senior Vice President for Environmental Affairs for Capital Fortitude Business Advisors, Georgia Political Director of the Bernie Sanders for President campaign, a partner for Social Karma Agency. He has a bachelor's degree from Clark Atlanta University, homegrown, and he is endorsed by the Sierra Club Georgia chapter, whose members are 75,000 strong, and they are inspired by nature. They work together to protect our communities and the planet. They're America's oldest, largest, and most influential grassroots environmental organization. Welcome, Mr. Blackman.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And we enjoy having you today.
Looking forward to the conversation. We're almost there.
Okay, absolutely. We have a few questions for this program, and I'd like to begin the questioning with our co-host, Ms. Damita Chatman from the Citizens for Excellent and Elected Leaders.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on today. I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to you getting across the finish line on November the 3rd. One of the questions that I had come in was, what is the Public Service Commission? Explain to the public what they are responsible for and overseeing. I think he's on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. The Public Service Commission in Georgia, and first of all, thank you all for having us. So close to the election, every single opportunity to speak to voters and to speak to individuals to inform them is welcome. So we are the Public Service Commission is a 5-member body that regulates utilities in the state of Georgia. That's a really, really complicated way to say that they're the ones to determine how much you pay when you cut your lights on. So it's very unique in a space that in Georgia, we have amongst the highest utility rates in the country. On average, individuals pay around 5% of their paycheck towards their utility bill. But in Georgia, we pay upwards of 18 to 20% of our paychecks going towards our utility bills. So when you think about utility regulation, it's not, the most attractive position in the world, but it's very necessary. They're responsible for regulating electric and gas marketers, namely Georgia Power, Atlanta Gas and Light. But this is a statewide election. So if you live in Albany, if you live in Columbus, where I grew up, if you live in Valdosta, you live in Rabun County or Forsyth County, where I currently live, you can actually vote for the Public Service Commission and have an impact on the kind of energy we generate in Georgia, which directly impacts our health, our pocketbooks, and also wireless broadband expansion so that young men and women who are in school don't get left behind with the digital divide. We've got to expand broadband in Georgia and around the country.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Norm. He's on mute.
We're all having that problem today. Excuse me. Sir, Mr. Blackman.
There was a delay in me coming off of mute too, so I'm not going to hold it against you, man.
Okay, thank you. Modern technology. Sir, what drew you into the Public Service Commission job, and what types of reform will you seek to bring about?
That's a very good question. And the short answer of it, it's really funny. I'm on my way to Albany, Georgia. And, the amazing thing about where we are as a society is, we talk a lot about environmental justice, which is the entry point that I took. Over 20 years ago, I got involved in environmental and justice and civil rights work. But it wasn't until Hurricane Katrina in 2005 that it hit me. A lot of us, we hear about climate change and global warming. And, when I was in school back in Columbus, Georgia, I remember talking about the ozone layer. And a lot of times the scientific aspects of how the air we breathe and the water we drink are impacted are not articulated to us. And it wasn't until I met Van Jones right after Hurricane Katrina happened. And Van at the time was creating an organization called Green for All. He was doing phenomenal work. I had never met an African-American, let alone an African-American man that had such an authority and such a knowledge of the environment. And when I began to do my research on the historical context of people of color and the impact on environmental issues, it made me really rethink what I was doing. It's one thing to talk about voting rights and mass incarceration and, poverty, but a lot of times we tend to be limited as a people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to a specific area. And when I would go to these meetings around the country, when I would speak at rallies with hundreds of people, I would too often be one of the only African Americans in the room. So for a long time, I worked on environmental justice issues around the United States. In 2015, I was invited to the Vatican to be a part of a summit, a climate summit, an interfaith summit ahead of the Paris Climate Accords. And I served on the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan for the final portion of his term. So I was able to not only support democratic policies, I was able to support the Congressional Black Caucus in their studies with the EPA and the Department of Energy on racial disparity, worked with the NAACP on their cold-blooded plan where they showed how emissions from fossil fuel facilities had an impact on our communities. And, I got to a point where I had too much information. And I had a choice, either hoard the information or get off my butt and go out there and encourage the community to learn about the issues and to address the issues that are in fact impacting us most, which are health issues and financial issues as it relates to utility bills in our communities. So that was the entry point. And I'm happy I made the decision. And there's no other position I would even be interested right now besides that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Is Ms. Chatman still with us?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Okay, thank you, Daniel. The next question is, what drew you to the Public Service Commission job, and what types of reform will you seek to bring about?
Yeah, I think we just kind of touched on that, but the reform side, one of the things that really drew me outside of, my entry point to environmental justice is my grandfather served as a diplomat to the United Nations. So coming from a political family, my grandfather was the diplomat from Barbados, and he retired as consul general to New York, representing the country. So I come from a political family where in Barbados, our family has been very influential in the political process. But policy reform wise, there are a couple of things. Number one, we've got to make sure that we're encouraging and implementing more clean energy. The majority of our health issues, when you look at COVID-19, the majority of the health issues that our community has faced has been a direct result of pre-existing conditions. Well, where do those pre-existing conditions come from? Comes from the type of things that we're putting in our bodies. You know, when you're exposed to the fossil fuel industry to extremely low air quality, when you're exposed to areas like Cancer Alley in Louisiana and other areas like Burke County, Georgia, and Juliet, Georgia, where water contamination and soil contamination has a direct impact, I believe that we've got to look at alternative forms of energy to reduce the amount of health risks that we may take on as a community. So the beautiful thing about it is I'm in a position now where I can advocate for that, and I can actually work directly with utility companies to increase our ability to get into biofuels and to solar, which I'll touch on later. Solar is something that I'm very much wanting to push, but we've got to make sure solar is affordable for everyone and accessible to everyone, including renters. Secondly, if you want a clean energy economy, you got to have a clean energy workforce. The only way we build a workforce is if we recruit, in my opinion, students from our technical colleges and our historically Black colleges for two reasons. One, technical college students are more apt to go into areas that are, shovel-ready jobs and positions that I think are much needed. But more than that, you look at the energy industry and it is not diverse. So I think we need to go to historically Black colleges. We need to work with national organizations like ABE, which stands for the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And we've got to change that narrative. Why? Because if we're going to create the jobs of the future, we have to have the workforce of the future. If the workforce of the future doesn't reflect the neighborhoods in which they come from, then we have further challenges. And then more importantly than that, we've got to make sure that we're doing the things that are needed now to educate our communities and to educate our children to make sure that we're making better decisions as it relates to clean air. There's a definition from the United Nations that says we're well able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So I believe in setting policies that don't compromise the next generation's ability to thrive and prosper and to do as well as we were able to do throughout our time and even better. So those are the main issues that I would deal with. Outside of that, expanding wireless broadband is extremely critical. If we're not looking at investing into the infrastructure for high-speed internet, as I drive around the state of Georgia, I'm constantly, last week I was between Columbus, Georgia, which is Muskogee County, Albany, Georgia, which is Dougherty County, and Augusta, Georgia, which is Richmond County. And in driving, I lost my connectivity at least 7 or 8 times. I regularly was in areas where they're complaining that their students' accessibility to the internet was very low. And if we don't fix that issue, we run the risk of losing an entire generation because they're not connected to the internet. And in our community, and specifically Black and brown communities, and even low and moderate income communities, if our children can't get online to learn, then our children can't compete. And if they can't compete, they fall into that statistic where 88% of Georgia's prison population read to the 3rd grade level. We have to have our children with internet accessibility, and we have to make sure that for emergency services, our communities have access to high-speed internet and telecommunications.
Thank you. Let me ask you another question. Do you think that during the COVID-19, and you see how all the schools and everybody's on the internet, do you think that that should be a free service to the residents, the community that can't afford that service?
Well, when you look at the metrics, should it be a free service? Internet accessibility should of course, I agree, be free, but it should also be treated as a public utility. We have to begin to make sure that it's not only available and accessible, but that we're actually making the investments into the infrastructure. The bottom line is when you look at companies, and I'll give credit to the governor, there's a lot of things I don't agree with, but when he and AT&T got together to deploy 500 mobile hotspots in the state of Georgia, I agree with that. I don't think it's enough. I think we can definitely be doing more. But at the end of the day, I strongly agree that the governor and our companies like AT&T and T-Mobile, they've got to take a much stronger role. If we're not looking at public and private investments, then the burden, to your question, falls onto the ratepayers and onto low and moderate income families. And we cannot afford to overtax, overburden, and charge these families in these communities, because in my opinion, to charge them for it would be to basically hold them accountable to dig themselves out of the ditch that they didn't put themselves into.
Thank you so much. Mr. Carter?
Yes, sir. Mr. Blackman, thank you for your answers. They're very informative. I have another one. Two new nuclear reactors under construction at Plant Vogtle are
Correct.
over budget and years behind schedule. What would you do to protect Georgia consumers from steep rate hikes to pay for the completion of the units 3 and 4 at Georgia's nuclear plant Vogtle?
Can you repeat the last part of your question? You
Yeah,
dipped out for a second.
I'm
What
sorry.
would I do?
Yes, what would you do to protect Georgia consumers from the steep expected rate hikes to pay for the completion of units 3 and 4?
Oh, that's the easy question. Number one, we need to stop giving Georgia Power a blank check. You know, we're currently looking at a $29 billion project. As you stated, it's behind schedule. As you stated, it is over budget. You know, earlier this year, due to the impact of COVID, and I don't take it lightly because, you know, to our union brothers and sisters and our workers that are depending on those jobs, because of the impact of COVID, halting progress at the construction of Vogtle 3 and 4, they've now asked for an additional $1 billion. I mean, this is something that is not only a tremendous burden, but we've got to begin to reverse that course. So for those that don't know, if you got your itemized bill, you would see that citizens around this state, ratepayers, are paying for it. You know, most people don't realize there's something called construction work in progress. On your bill, it might say NCCR, which is Nuclear Construction Cost Recovery, which is basically your payment up front to guarantee the construction of Plant Vogtle. Number one,
Wow.
to answer your question, I think Georgia Power shareholders should take more of a responsibility than the ratepayers. In Mississippi, for example, Mississippi Power, which is owned by Southern Company, it's a subsidiary of Southern Company. So how we have Georgia Power, they have Mississippi Power. They were building a coal-fired facility, and they did not put the cost of the construction onto the ratepayers. Why? Because they had an active legislative body that worked with the Public Service Commission to ensure that that wouldn't happen. Well, in Georgia, we didn't do that. In Georgia, Democrats and Republicans voted for the construction of Vogtle. The problem is, not only was it a mistake that was made, but it persisted because once the legislative body, which I strongly believe they had the intent to do the right thing, given the information they were given, no one could have forecast where we are today. But most of us should have known then that this was going to be an extremely expensive project, and it would have taken a lot of data and a lot of information. So number one, we need to make sure that we stop charging consumers and ratepayers for the construction of Plant Vogtle. We will be paying for the next 60 years for Plant Vogtle. Let me repeat that. We will be paying for the next 60 years to pay off Plant Vogtle. These two new reactors, okay? On top of that, not only are we on the hook for paying it, but our utility rates have already been increased. In December of 2019, the Public Service Commission voted to increase both our gas and our electric utilities. What that means is when you increase a base rate, that means that you literally are in position where you are, whether you use more power or you use less power, your utility bill will go up. Why? Because the base rate to operate and function your gas and your electric is going to be increased across the board. That does not take into effect the amount of money that you're spending when summers get hotter and winters get colder. That is not taken to consideration senior citizens on a fixed income who should never have to choose between their medication and their light bill. So we're looking at all these things across the board. On top of that, the Public Service Commission recently in the last 3.5 months voted not only to end the moratorium, which means they are now back to disconnecting your utilities, but they've also voted to allow the utility companies to recoup their losses due to COVID-19, which means you're going to get another increase on your bill. So when it comes to Plant Vogtle, I don't believe that we should be getting any more charges. I believe that we should cap it off. So in other words, if Georgia Power decides they want any other increases, I would be 110%, and I'm saying this on your show, I'm being recorded, I would not vote for any more charges to increase the utility rates on construction due to Plant Vogtle. I believe that the utility companies, they have a right to be profitable. They're providing safe and reliable energy, and I'm all for that. But it should not be done on the backs of hardworking folks that are struggling to recover. And then lastly, one of the biggest things that I think we can do and we can implement going forward is to make sure that our legislative body has stakeholder meetings and commissions in place. When Governor Sonny Perdue were in office, there was something called the Consumer Utility Council, which was funded by the state of Georgia for about $400,000. That was defunded under Governor Sonny Perdue. That commission was comprised of staff members of the Public Service Commission and private citizens. We need to put in place like a citizens review board so that when these decisions are made, the utility companies have to unapologetically, through full transparency, explain every charge, every rate increase, every consideration, so that we can be at the table and not on the menu. That's what's happening. Too many people that are not in the room are having choices made for them that are impacting them more than anything else. So sorry for the long answer, but that's a pretty complicated issue.
That's information. We need that. We need that. Absolutely. Thank you. Ms. Chatman, do you have a question?
Okay, yes. Another question I have is, what is the Public Service Commission doing well? And if you had to pick one thing to change about the PSC is currently doing, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we don't have enough time for me to tell you what I would change on the Public Service Commission. But I'll tell you two things they're doing right. The first thing I think the Public Service Commission is doing right is I think the Public Service Commission, with all fairness, has made a better effort in pursuing renewable energy. I don't think they've done enough. I don't think they've moved fast enough. But I will admit that they, over the last 4 or 5 years, have been making some decisions that I would be in agreement with, but I think we need to be more aggressive. And I'll give you an example. It's just like if we say that we need, for example, healthcare in the United States, right? If you're saying that we need more healthcare and you're offering healthcare and you're doing it at a decent rate, that's okay. But the best option would be to expand it statewide, make it accessible for everyone, and make it affordable. So that's what I mean when I say they're doing a decent job. I'd give them a C, maybe a C plus on what they've been doing. But I think we have to do more because let's think about that, right? If you want to increase solar in Georgia, that means that you have to be able to afford it. Why? Because we don't have community solar in the capacity that we should have it. And I'll give you an example. If you want to put a solar system on your home, that is a $10,000 to $15,000 expense. Most people don't have $10,000 or $15,000 sitting around to put a solar system on their house. So we've got to do a better job of increasing that capacity and protecting renters, like cities like Los Angeles under the leadership of my friend, Mayor Eric Garcetti. We've got to follow the trends and incentivize opportunities to expand solar and to increase people's accessibility and opportunity to access it. What I think they're doing wrong is I think they're overcommitted to the utility companies they regulate and undercommitted to the ratepayers. Bottom line, my opponent, Bubba McDonald, who is the co-chair to Donald Trump's reelection campaign, is not only on record for saying that folks shouldn't be behind on their utility bills because the president gave a stimulus check, but my opponent has taken 82% of his money that he's raised from utility companies. And there's a quote that says, it's hard to get a man to understand a thing when his salary depends on him not understanding it. How can you take money? And I see my friend Robert Bryant has joined us. His opponent, Jason Shaw, has taken an overwhelming majority of money from utility companies. We cannot put our trust, our faith, and our hope in individuals that's taking money from folks that they're regulating. You can't regulate people if they're paying for you to get elected and reelected, because now you put yourself in a position where we question your judgment and your integrity.
Wow. Thank you very much. We'd like to welcome our second guest, Dr. Robert Bryant.
Hello.
Dr. Bryant.
Hello, thanks.
for tuning in.
Sorry for my delay. We are welcoming a new member to the family. And so with
Oh, wow.
that and scheduling a lot of that, I'm just here. So we're welcoming a new cousin to our, I think, 4th generation. So that's exciting. And so, but sorry for my delay and happy to join you all.
Congratulations. Life does get in the way of life, so that's a good thing.
I love that quote.
Mr. Carter, let me give him the a couple questions that I gave Mr. Daniel.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bryant, for coming on. What is the Public Service Commission? Explain to the public what it is and what their responsibility is overseeing.
Right. Well, the Public Service Commission should be, and I'll be using that word, should be regulating utilities and respect to light bill, gas bill, and telecommunications. It should be an advocate for the public, hence the word Public Service Commission. What we have seen, and I'm sure Daniel has done a wonderful job of explaining, is that they advocate for Georgia Power. And I'm not sure that's why it was created, or else it would have been called the Georgia Power Commission. And so what we've got to do is shift the narrative and start advocating for public, especially now as we've seen the Public Service Commission, and in regards to my opponent, Mr. Shaw, tend not to think about working class Georgians, tend not to think about communities of color, and really tend to think more about putting more money in the pockets of their friends. Today I was thinking about this whole idea that our Republican friends use called radical, policy. Well, it's radical to me when you help those who have to have more and those who have not have less. And so that, to me, that's a little more radical than trying to make sure we all have a fair share at life. And so we've got to change that narrative.
Absolutely. Oh, okay. The next question I have is, what is the Public Service Commission doing well? And if you had to pick one thing to change about what the PSC is currently doing, what will it be?
Right. Well, what they do well is keeping secrets. What they do well is making sure those who have profits do get more profits. So they do a good job of being non-transparent. They do a good job of doing shady deals. And, it's not an indictment on the full Public Service Commission. What it tells me is we don't have a diversity viewpoint at the table. We don't have people to offer checks and balances. And that's why Daniel Blackman and myself are so needed on the Public Service Commission. We need people who are going to offer challenges to the ideas and not have 5 commissioners who think alike and who share the same ideologies. And so that's what they do well. What I would like to change is, as I said earlier, being more of a consumer advocate. And that means making sure that every Georgian, every community in Georgia has the same resources, meaning broadband, meaning better power rates, meaning that we have programs that help equal the playing field. And so when you're in rural Georgia, we know that broadband internet is not only a learning piece, but there's an economic component to it. Myself included, I've had an online business. I like to do transactions online, like my doctor's visits, etc. I like to shop on Amazon. And I'm sure those families would like to do the same thing. And so while we see the learning impact that we don't have with broadband internet being accessible, there's also an economic piece that we are missing as well. And so that's the one thing I would like to change is broadly, we need to make sure that we have an equal playing field for our rural Georgians, but also in particular with internet broadband.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Okay. I'd like to go off. First of all, I don't think I emphasized that Dr. Bryant is running for a candidate for the Public Service Commission of District 1 in Georgia. And our guest, Mr. Blackman, is a candidate for Public Service Commissioner of District 4. I'd like to go a little off script because I don't think that we emphasize that you're both Democratic candidates running for office. And this may have been partially answered by Mr. Blackman earlier, but I'd like to just throw this out here because the President of the United States is aggressively backing reinstitution of the coal industry. And both of you are about clean air. So how does that impact your goals for the community? Because that presents to me a steep hill for both of you to have to climb. And either one of you can.
I can I'll let Robert. Look, Robert, I'll let you go first, and I can jump in.
Okay. Oh yeah, no problem, man. And thank you, Daniel. But here's the thing, and I want to speak directly to those who work in those industries. We're not trying to get rid of jobs, because I know that our Republican friends, that's going to be the next kind of lie they tell, is that, oh, they're going to take away your jobs. No, what we're trying to do is, if you work in coal and you work in fossil fuel industries, that's the direct impact to those folks' health. If you're breathing in coal ash and breathing in those types of chemicals, that leads to issues like cancer. And so what we're saying is, let's provide a better future for those laborers. Let's make sure that we create clean energy. And by the way, let's offer training programs with a partnership with our technical colleges to help them have those workers placed in clean careers, not jobs, careers that are paying a fair wage, paying a salary, as a matter of fact. And the coal piece in particular provides a public health issue for a number of us. How many of us have ever lit up a grill before and used charcoal? Well, we know when that charcoal is done burning, it turns into ash. That's exactly what happens to coal. When the Georgia Powers of the world burn that coal, it turns to ash, it drops into our water, we breathe it in our air. And so that leads to other issues. If that is not treated properly, if coal ash ponds are not treated properly, it can then seep into our water. Okay, so what then happens? We have poisoned water like we do in Flint, Michigan. So we want to avoid those issues. And so that's why coal is bad. It, number one, is not a great impact on our health. It is not the best solution for energy. And we have opportunities to create more affordable and sustainable types of energy solutions that will protect workers and protect our public health and our environment, for a matter of fact. And so, the whole coal thing, and I'll put it out there for the viewers, the whole thing about Trump, supporting coal and my opponent supporting coal is, again, to help fill the pockets of their friends who already are wealthy millionaires. And so we want to do more clean, sustainable careers to protect Georgians, and that's a sustainable future for them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blackman, did you care to answer that?
Yeah, of course. Robert did a great job of, really outlining the health impact. I couldn't agree more on the coal ash ponds. And, when most people, like he said, they think of Flint, Michigan, that they don't think about the Savannah River being on one of the 12 most polluted rivers in the country. They don't think about Juliet, Georgia, where folks are facing that issue that Robert just brought up, which is the coal ash pond contamination seeping into the water. In Monroe County, Georgia, it's on record. You can Google it. They found uranium in the well water in Monroe County. And we've got to address those issues. I mean, I think the talking points and the fear mongering of some Republicans to really try to think that the Democrats are trying to take their jobs and they're trying to preserve them. Let me give you a number really quickly. There are 50,000 jobs in the United States that are directly related to the coal industry. 50,000 jobs. And I'm not talking about across the board with, with all the jobs, the technical. So I'm talking about from coal ash standpoint, mining. This is not an industry of the 322 million people in the United States. And not to say those 50,000 are insignificant, but let's be really, really honest, okay? In about 5 to 7 years, autonomous driving, that's why I care so much about our labor and our worker community. In 5 to 7 years, autonomous driving is going to replace 3.5 million trucking jobs. Okay, 3.5 million trucking jobs will be gone due to autonomous driving. You can look it up. You can look at the Forbes articles, the Tesla report, the report, the Department of Energy. These are not numbers that I'm pulling out of the sky. These jobs are going to be obsolete, right? And it's the same with the coal industry. Robert and I aren't trying to take jobs. We're trying to say, look, let's protect the ones we have now, but make sure the regulations and the oversight is in place to protect the environment, not take your jobs. But two, to Robert's point, the reason why we talk about technical colleges and HBCUs so much is because we want to retrain them. Look, you mentioned it earlier. I have no, shame of being Bernie Sanders' political director in 2016, and we were pushing for free college. Why? Not because we felt that free college was just a good political talking point, because we understand there's an aging population in the United States that has worked in the coal industry for 30 and 40 years. We don't want them to say, hey, you know what, we appreciate it, it's time to go. We want the technical colleges and the historically Black colleges to open open their doors so that we can retrain those same workers that bring a tremendous amount of expertise into the kind of jobs Robert and I are advocating for, which is clean energy jobs. The bottom line is the future is green. There's no way around that. If it's not, we lose our planet. And the last time I checked, we only have one Earth. So if we don't start making plans now and making decisions now, we're in trouble. And the last example I'll give you so we can move on is just look at Dubai. Dubai didn't turn into a country that was built solely on tourism because they just woke up one day and said, hey, you know what? Tourism is great. Let's do it. They did that because they're running out of oil. And they're realizing that if they don't switch their model and transition, then they are no longer going to be able to thrive as a society. So Dubai with United Arab Emirates was created and established out of them planning for the future and not being stuck in a space where they had to rely on a system and a resource that was going to be depleted.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Ms. Chatman, did you want to take the next question?
Yes, I can. What drew you to the public commissioner job, and what type of reforms will you seek to bring about? I don't know if I answered that. I don't think I did.
Yeah, that was for Dr. Bryant.
Okay.
Mr. Blackman answered it.
Okay. What about Mr. Bryant? You want to take that, Mr. Bryant?
Sure. And if you could restate the first part, I remember the last part.
What drew you to the public service commission job?
Gotcha. Well, I returned back to Georgia. I grew up in Georgia, in Savannah, Georgia, attended public schools, and went on to Georgia Southern University of Georgia. So my background is in diversity, multicultural inclusion work. And most recently, I was a chief diversity officer at a liberal arts institution. So I returned home to caretake for mom and dad, and both who are elderly, and mom who's really fighting Alzheimer's. And when I returned, I didn't want to just sit at home. And part of me trying to get back involved and to become a public leader was sitting down with the chairman of the Democratic Party County, with Jay Jones, awesome guy. I had a long conversation available. And three things stood out to me: advocacy, protecting the public, and making a difference. All of those things align with the Public Service Commission. And so he and I did some more researching and digging, and all of those things made sense for having someone who would sit on the Public Service Commission. But I even took it a step further. I realized that there was no diversity at that planning table. There was no one speaking for communities of color, no one who could advocate for working class families. And honestly, there was no one who really cared about the public, in my opinion. Now, I'm not making an indictment again on all five commissioners, but that's the way I see it. And so I immediately said, let me dig deeper. And I realized that the Public Service Commission is about your monthly budget, your health, and our environment. And those three things alone, I feel that I can advocate for those in a way that is very different than my opponent. And so I look forward to being an advocate for the public, making sure that if there's ever another rate increase, that rate increase benefits the ratepayers. Far too many times we've heard the lies about, hey, we're going to raise rates because it's going to fix the grid and we're going to do storm repair and all. No. At the end of the day, the Georgia Power CEO takes home $4.5 million a year. But you had the nerve to lift a moratorium when working class families and people who are underemployed and unemployed were trying to figure this thing out. That is not the way we treat people. That's not how we're going to treat Georgians. And so Daniel and I are looking forward to bringing a breath of new air and having someone on the Public Service Commission that cares about the people and is compassionate enough and knows the stories of people who are struggling, and that we can take that forward and tell our fellow commissioners, look, it's not time to lift a moratorium. It's time to protect our fellow citizens who deserve that treatment. And so that's kind of my story of how I got here and what the difference I want to make.
Thank you. Now, I was going to ask another question about the tax rate and how the Public Commission, they raise utilities every year, and they come back with this different story why they raised it. Some people can't hardly afford that. So would you try to control that rate increase? Like, for instance, the gas got a rate for the winter, then it goes back down in the summer, the lights go up. So will you try to get like a special rate and leave it there? And then another thing, some of the seniors, how can they get on a type of budget that will help them all year long, and not a budget where they pay a lot of money, a budget that fits income?
Right. As a matter of fact, there are programs that are available that are not that help those numbers of those vulnerable communities. They're not highly visible, but that's another piece that we can do well, is to help highlight those programs such as energy efficiency and how to make sure that your home is more efficient. And for example, I live with seniors, my mother and father. There are pieces around the house that I did immediately when I returned, such as replacing every light bulb in the home, an incandescent light bulb, with an LED light bulb. That type of stuff saves energy. There are cracks in your door where there's air seeping in and out. Those types of things that we can do better and make sure that people understand those programs exist. As far as rates go, I'm telling you right now, I promise you all this, Georgia, I will not vote on a rate increase unless I see the benefit to the consumer. That's a promise I have made from day one, and I won't. I understand. I have family members. I have neighbors. I've seen what that means when we raise rates and we don't think about how that impacts people. And when we can't continue that path forward. As a matter of fact, I think $1 billion company can lend a little hand to folks who are struggling. And so as far as the rates are concerned, I think when we start looking at cleaner, sustainable energy sources like solar and giving people tax breaks or incentives to install solar roofs, I think that gives us a way forward that we can find ways to reduce rates. And again, we've got to get in the trenches and figure that out. And that means sitting down with consumers and getting ideas and working with stakeholders throughout the state, such as organizations that are advocating for these types of changes. And I believe that we can lower those rates and find ways to help, our consumers lower their cost through energy efficient programs.
Thank you. What you think about that, Daniel?
I actually dropped for about 10 seconds, so I didn't hear the latter part of the question. Can you repeat it?
Oh, it was so off the head, so we just gonna leave that alone. It was so off the head. That's a good one. Go on and give him a question, Mr. Noor.
Okay, this would be for both. Should the cost of be a determining factor when for energy sources such that the utilities companies use, or should the goals like cleaner air and reduced carbon emissions? Let me take that again because I sort of stumbled over it. Should costs be the determining factor in determining what energy sources the utilities use, or should goals like cleaner air and reduced carbon emissions?
I mean, we've got to put people over profits. I've committed to not taking any money from the fossil fuel industry for that very question, because we've seen the irreparable damages of making decisions based on price. Black children in the United States get asthma 3 times the national rate. Why? Because when you look at our zip codes, if you go read the NAACP's cold-blooded report, COAL blooded report that they released, they have a map with the highest populated areas of Black and brown communities. And what you see on that map is you will begin to see that the majority of our communities, 68% of our communities, is in within 30 miles of a fossil fuel facility. And you want to know why our communities are suffering with so many pre-existing conditions during COVID-19? It's because of what I said earlier, the air we breathe and the water we drink. If we do not make decisions based on clean energy, on public health, on the best interests of our families and our neighbors, then we run the risk of having the damages that we will not be able to repair. If you want to understand these issues and the long-term impacts, just look at the communities that have been left behind. You look at Gainesville, Georgia right now. When you make those decisions and landfills are in communities, a good friend of mine, Mustafa Ali, who was over the Civil Rights Division of the EPA, he said it best. The most underserved and underheard communities are in our neighborhoods. And until we make decisions that put people ahead of profits, we're going to continue to be in a position that I think is going to last for generations to come. So I am opposed to making decisions solely based on profit. And both my opponent and Robert's opponent have made it very clear that they're on record to saying this. I know my opponent is. They're on record as saying Georgia is the best place to do business because of our utility rates and the way in which we attract business to come here. But what happens in times like COVID, where economies are completely shut down, now your decision to put profits ahead of people, it comes full circle because these communities that are struggling to survive and they're holding on, like in Albany, Georgia, where their industries have been completely shut down, in Raven County, in Lumpkin County, in areas that are not as fortunate and as prosperous as Atlanta, they are now being left behind because profits were put ahead of people.
Okay. Mr. Dunn, let me ask you a question. What do you think about, if you recall, we had a landfill in the city of South Fulton, had been burning for months and months and months. What do you feel about that and putting the landfills in the communities?
Is that for me or for Robert?
For both of you guys. But you can
Well,
start.
I mean, I'll be really quick because I just answered that first question. If you look at what happened with the pharmaceutical company yesterday, with this multi-billion-dollar lawsuit and settlement that they've had to make, I think when you look at landfills, especially like what happened in South Fulton, someone has to be accountable. And we can no longer have people accountable without there being some kind of, and I'm using this word intentionally, reparations. If you impact a community, it's not enough for you to be fined. If you're not going to jail, or if folks aren't recouping from the health impact, why do you think, which was mentioned earlier by Robert, why do you think the Flint water crisis, after all the time that has gone by, there's now a $600 million settlement, which I still don't think that's enough money. But the irreparable damages to young people and to children specifically who are still under their brain development stage, we need to start putting these companies on notice. If you're going to put a landfill or a toxic facility or like Sterigenics, if you're going to put these in our backyards, then you are going to pay the price, not only to repair our communities, not only for our health and wellness, but you will be fined. And as Robert and I, even if we become commissioners, we're not a part of a judicial body that can prosecute, but we can hold them accountable, and we'll do everything in our power to make sure we use our platform to put them on blast every time they have an impact on our communities.
All right, thank you. Mr. Robert, Bryant, you want to answer that question?
Almost definitely. I'll piggyback right. Daniel hit the nail on the head. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of what we don't see enough of nowadays is collaboration. And I think the Public Service Commission is successful when we collaborate. And what I mean by that in this particular question is, we don't mind reaching out and working with, coalitions that lead these issues to make noise about it. We don't mind partnering with district attorneys to make sure folks understand when you impact certain communities, you're going to be held accountable for that, as Daniel just said. And so the collaboration around that piece, being that we come from behind the computer, we come from behind the wonderful wood desk that we see on administrative hearings, and we get in the trenches. At the end of the day, I wish people would go and Google where these toxic landfills are and just see what communities they're located in. Plant Vogel, a nuclear plant is being built in the back of Waynesboro, Georgia, a community that is highly populated with people of color, mostly African Americans like you and I. Why is that? And I'm not saying that it should be in Buckhead, Georgia. I'm not saying it should be in other communities. What I'm saying is we don't need to do that at all. That's not how we need to be doing business. And while I understand nuclear might be cleaner and all that great stuff, the other part I did on my research is, what are we going to do with the nuclear waste? I wonder where that will go. And so again, it's going to rely on collaborations and working with the legislature, other community organizations like NAACP and community organizations that are about environmental protection, and making sure that these companies understand we don't mind, finding you or making sure if you want to put these toxic, landfills and other pieces of environmental damage in these communities, that not only will you be held accountable, but you need to pay for these folks' health care. And so there are ways we're going to get this done.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Carter.
Now, I did want to make a comment, and both of you gentlemen touched on it. And reparations was one word that was used, and compensation for adverse health care. Uh, I don't know whether you're aware that or heard of black lung disease, and there is a government program to give these people, not that it really helps that much, but tax breaks and I believe additional health care.
It's primarily in Kentucky and West Virginia. I'm very
Correct.
familiar.
Right. Yeah, but it's not. But you have communities like Newton County and Waynesboro where you're talking about.
Yep.
That's not even a consideration, which is crazy, and it is what it looks like. So,
I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. It's based on race. When you look at Cancer Alley and you look at areas around the country, there's never an incentive or a reparation for low and moderate income communities, specifically in our community. So it is what it is, man, and no need to sugarcoat it.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Throw in another question to both of you, and you may have touched on this, and I hope I'm not being repetitious, but how can the Georgia Public Service Commission encourage investment in and adoption of clean energy like solar, wind, and other renewable zero or low carbon resources? And I say that in the light that you've probably heard the President of the United States, that keep bringing him back up, ridicule clean energy. So I'd just like for you both to comment on that if you can.
I mean, Robert, you want to take that first or you want me to take it?
I'll go for it. Let me get that video. Okay, I fixed it. Well, I'll say this much. You know, in regards to our leader of our country, what you got to realize is he's all about big business. And so any way he can protect big business, any way he can protect his friends and family that do big business in the oil and those types of industries, he will. That's how he's paid off. And we'll just leave it at that. But how can we promote that change on the Public Service Commission? We've got to make it we have to build more incentives around it. And so, for example, why not have incentives for people to move towards, solar energy, for example, and to do solar panels on their roof, but make it accessible too by making it affordable. And we do that by promoting small business in the state. Right now, there are not a lot of small businesses that kind of work in those areas, but we promote that and we reward people for doing that through tax breaks and a number of other incentives that we can get done. As far as getting that done, I think we collaborate with our University System of Georgia institutions, as well as our AUC, Atlanta University Consortium, HBCUs, to get the research and the ideas that help us to move forward with that. And so maybe wind energy, hydro energy, but we've got to build incentives and make it affordable for people to move in that direction and get Georgia Power to say, you know what, this is a great way forward. Let's collaborate and we buy back some of that energy. It's a lot of what we see in different states and the models out there. We've just got to get, again, a diverse perspective at the table so that we can do these things. Because when you have big businesses around the table, and that's all you have around the table, you have people like Georgia Power and a number of companies pay my opponent to resist these ideas.
Thank you.
What I would say is there are three simple fixes to your question. If you want to really think about it, number one, we've got to drive public and private partnerships. The thing that bothers me the most, I don't want to make this attack the Republican, just throw them under the bus. Because there's some folks like my friend Ashley Bell, who's done good work representing the president and with the SBA. But let's be honest, this country finds money when there's a priority. Mm-hmm. There has never been a time in modern history where we have not found money for war. There's never been a time in modern history where we've not found money to bail out Wall Street or the auto industry. So now that we're saying that we need money for the clean energy industry, we're saying, well, where do we find the money at? We just found $3 trillion in our first stimulus package. We're promoting another 2.5 trillion and another trillion after that because of the so-called financial industry that was secured certain amounts of money for the banking industry. So I push back, not to your question, but to the notion that we don't have the money for it. Let's be honest. Public and private partnerships, number one, is the way we move that needle. Why? I have a cousin that goes to Georgia Southern right now. Georgia Southern is one of the perfect, most positioned, well-positioned universities for us to take $1.5 million, $2 million tops to just do research and development to study wind off of coastal Georgia. Why aren't we looking at the Blue Ridge Mountains right now, taking $1 million in Blue Ridge? $1 million. We're not talking about the billion Georgia Power asked for Plant Vogtle. $1 million in Blue Ridge to see how much wind we can generate, so we have the actual data to show us what and where we can invest into. So that's number one, increasing our capacity for public and private partnerships. Number two, to Robert's point about going and recruiting folks, we need to open up this space to minority contract. And I don't just mean minority as an all inclusive. Let me be very clear. Black and brown communities have been left out of the equation for too long. There are existing women-owned organizations, primarily white women-owned organizations, that are already playing in this space. I know that because when President Obama was in office in 2012 and in 2015, I met with the head of the Department of Energy. I met with the heads of the Environmental Protection Agency, and I saw the contracts for the 8A certified companies that were bidding. And I also worked with the Tea Party as a Democrat in 2013 when Georgia Power released their IRP, and we pushed back against them to increase their amount of solar, 525 megawatts of solar. And guess what else I saw? I saw not one African-American company bid on any of the proposals. Why? One, for lack of information, and two, because most of the companies just don't exist. So to Robert's point, we've got to get more minority contracting, but we've got to expand that. So number one, public and private partnerships. Number two, minority contracting opportunities and building the incubator so we can have more shovel-ready businesses so when these projects come, they can go into it. And then lastly, and probably more importantly, is we've got to convene the stakeholders around the state and encourage this to happen. I believe it starts with our institutions. When you look at what's happened with COVID-19 and with online learning, we all can agree on one thing. Our public schools and our collegiate system is failing. All right. There are schools that are doing well, but let's be very, very honest. Most of our kids, when they graduate from high school, are not prepared for the real world. They're not prepared because they haven't been trained in financial literacy. They don't know about climate change. They don't know about civics. So by the time they get out, we're sitting down beating them up for not voting when we didn't give them an incentive to vote. If we want advocates to come out and to represent our interests, we've got to start early. That, in my opinion, begins with K through 12 education. In my county, Forsyth County, Georgia, where I became the first African-American to ever run for office in this county, we have a school called the Alliance Academy. The Alliance Academy literally has a track for clean energy. All right, I live in a predominantly white county. We need one of these in Southwest Atlanta. We need one of those in Chatham County. We need one of those in Muskogee County. We need counties all over Georgia to start implementing public school level learning that introduces these kids early so that they can become our advocates and our partners in the movement towards a clean energy economy.
Wow.
Thank you.
Ms. Chatman, do you have any other questions?
Do you have any?
No, it's what is odd is that I probably had questions, but these gentlemen have been so forthcoming with information. I mean, it's not just yes and no answers that we're getting from them. We're getting the full blown picture. And that's something that we don't usually get, particularly from candidates running for office, both of whom seem to be very, very knowledgeable and very, very experienced. And I just hope that people are paying attention.
Yes, yes.
I really hope that people are paying attention to both of you.
Yes. You know, I had an opportunity to meet Daniel at some conferences. Great young man, and very smart and know his business. So Daniel and Mr. Bryant, we're looking to get you across the finish line November the 3rd to represent the people. So I'm excited, and I just believe that you guys are going to make it across that finish line, and it's going to be victorious because we need change right now. You know, everybody chasing that money,
Yep.
and folks will sell their soul for that dollar.
Would it be appropriate if both Robert and I gave a closing statement?
Oh, yeah, you're
Absolutely.
gonna give one. You're gonna give
Yeah.
one. Absolutely. You can give it to us. You can start right now.
And I just want to jump in. Would you please let us know exactly what cities and counties you cover, so that our listeners and viewers can have that also?
Well,
Sure.
here's the beautiful thing. Robert and I will be representing District 1, which is Robert, and District 4, which is myself. My district alone, I've got 28 counties in North Georgia. However, you can vote for Robert and I no matter where you live in Georgia. So here's the beautiful thing. In the 140-year history of the Public Service Commission, there's never been an African American elected. You have an opportunity on November 3rd to elect 2 of them. And not since 2006 has a Democrat, David Burgess, who was appointed by Governor Roy Barnes, served there. So on November 3rd, not only can you elect the first 2 African Americans in the history of the commission, you can elect a Democrat that hasn't had a statewide constitutional office in almost 2 decades. So, I think it's very important for us to understand why this race is so important and what really goes into it.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant?
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure where we were, but I agree. I look forward to representing Georgia along with Daniel. I think there's a time to change the narrative across Georgia. For far too long, the big businesses have benefited, and it's time for the citizens of Georgia to have some relief and to have some compassion at the table. It's time for you to have someone at the table who will represent you, who will speak for you, and who will fight for you on an everyday basis. And so Daniel and I can do that. Just to give you kind of a glimpse, a mental image of District 1, I typically tell people if you draw a line from, I would say, Effingham County and draw a straight line across to Muskogee County, pretty much all of the counties under that, all of the southern counties constitute what's called District 1. But again, every Georgian can vote, regardless of where you are, for both positions. And that's the great thing about it. We are so pleased and so thankful for the momentum and the support we've received. And we just look forward to showing you that we're going to put our money where our mouth is come November 4th. We're going to start the day we're elected. And so, Georgia, get out and vote. Don't take this opportunity for granted. Vote early or vote on November 3rd.
Thank you very much. I think that we can see through this program how much votes matter. I can clearly remember back 2015, 2016, where there were people all over the internet saying that votes don't count. Your vote doesn't count. Nothing changes. And then we have this COVID-19 crisis, and we see where votes do matter, because when it gets down to the road, as one of our candidates just said, you have a crisis, and that's where the vacuum in leadership begins to affect people's lives. And we have before us 2 knowledgeable and dedicated community activists that have pledged and have shown, have a track record in serving the community, their various communities in Georgia. And they have cogent plans for the future. And we have 2 websites I'd like to leave with you. For Mr. Dr. Robert Bryant, you can visit his website at www.robertforga.com. That's www.robertforga.com. And for Mr. Blackman, you can visit his website at Daniel for FORGEORGIA, that's Georgia.com. Again, that is Daniel, DANIEL, for FORGEORGIA.com. Please visit their websites. I did that before this program. They are very, very, very informative, and will likely answer most questions that you have about utilities, cost, goals, and how their policies and their programs will positively affect you and your communities. Gentlemen, we do at WCEG Network thank you both for joining us with just a ton of useful information. And we at WCEG wish you the best of luck going into November 3rd.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you have been listening. And thank you, Ms. Chatman.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Chapman.
Thank you.
And once again, Ms. Chatman is for excellent.
UPS.
Oops, I'm sorry. Somebody's bleeding in here. I'm sorry, but this happens with Zoom. But again, I'd like to thank Ms. Chatman for joining us and also being the basis for our bringing these informative programs to all of our listeners. It's been great having you once again on Issues and Answers on the WCEG Network. Again, my name is Norman A. Carter Jr., and we at WCEG thank you so very, very much for your continued support. We encourage all of you to get out and vote. I know the lines are long, but you know what? That's how we solve problems here. We solve problems by, number one, by demonstrating when we were outraged, but most of all by voting to change things. That's how we start change and get change moving. So thank all of you who have voted. I encourage those of you who have not voted to either vote early or be sure you're standing in line November 3rd. Again, thank you. Thank you so much. This is the WCEG Network, and we'll see you next time on Issues and Answers.